When a movie flops, directors find themselves at a crossroads. Sometimes they're able to get over it and come back better than ever like David Lean did. Other times they find themselves stuck in movie jail, unable to get their next, sometimes expensive, projects off the ground. In this video, I want to take a look at the directors that are either in movie jail right now and struggling to get a movie made, or that might find themselves there very, very soon. It's hard to call Joker Folie a $200 million bomb starring Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga and directed by Todd Phillips anything but a critical and commercial catastrophe. It didn't begin, as so many think, with the fact that it's a musical. No, it all started with a dream that Joaquin Phoenix had. In this case, literally. The Hollywood Reporter reported that, quote, the idea for the sequel came to Phoenix in a dream, end quote. That dream, apparently, was to make a $200 million musical sequel that neither of them actually wanted to make. Worse than that, nobody knew what a folie à deux was, and, seemingly, no one knew what the hell to do with this movie. It's a flabbergasting come down for Phillips, whose first Joker movie, released in 2019, was quite the sleeper hit. It raked in more than $1 billion, becoming the first R-rated movie to do so. It got decent, though polarizing reviews, and won Phoenix an Academy Award for Best Actor. For Phillips, it was nothing short of a conquering moment. His comedy movies, like the Hangover series, Project X, and Due Date, were all solid hits, but he eclipsed them all in one fell swoop. Unfortunately, the only people that really wanted Joker 2 were Warner Brothers. They raised half the $70 million budget of the first Joker from other sources, meaning that they also had to share half of the profits. They wanted the whole pie this time, so they ended up fronting the $200 million budget themselves. Now, they're the ones left holding the bag. It's not even their only flop of the year. George Miller's Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, also collapsed at the box office. The difference is that Furiosa is a good movie that got great reviews. Joker 2 doesn't even have that. Nobody likes it. Not the critics, not the fans. So what went wrong? You had two guys, Phoenix and Phillips, that did not want to make this movie. Even knowing that, Warner Brothers decided to give Phillips the Michael Cimino treatment. They not only gave him a $200 million budget to play with, but also final cut. Phillips and Phoenix could do whatever they wanted, and they had total control. Nobody could tell them otherwise. Whatever excitement fans might have had went out the window with the fact that it was a musical. At least Cimino delivered a 3.5-hour-long epic that was infused with a kind of perfectionist madness. For all the blame that Warner Brothers can get for forcing the sequel to happen, Phillips is responsible for the final product. What began as a dream would end up becoming a nightmare for Warner Brothers, who probably needed the movie to break around $450 million at the box office in order to just break even. The dust has yet to fully settle, so it's difficult to say how it'll impact his or Phoenix's career going forward, though it does not look good. I know some people are willing to write Todd Phillips off and assume he's going to movie jail, and that's certainly a possibility. After all, Warner Brothers is not going to be happy eating that $200 million loss. But if he already has his next project lined up, he might be able to stage a quick turnaround. Whatever the case though, this is a movie that would have been better left undone. It's also unlikely that he'll get the same kind of freedom for his next movie, if there is one. George Miller is a master of the craft of filmmaking. That is undeniable. It's not bad for a guy that started as a doctor and only made movies because he won a short film competition. The first Mad Max was a surprise hit, pulling $100 million on a budget that was as high as 400,000 Australian dollars. Still, the making of the movie was not a happy time for him. In his words, quote, making Mad Max was a very unhappy experience for me. I had absolutely no control over the final product. There was strong pressure to make a sequel, and I felt we could do a better job with a second movie, end quote. He was able to fully realize the world he wanted to create with Mad Max The Road Warrior with a larger budget, and continued the success with 1985's Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. All of the movies up to and including Furiosa have been positively received, though they have gotten wildly expensive. Still, there's a reason that, even before Fury Road, Mad Max has been cited as such an influential series and is synonymous with post-apocalyptic at this point. Between Beyond Thunderdome and Fury Road, Miller worked on other projects as Fury Road was moving at a glacial speed. In 1987, he did The Witches of Eastwick and then Lorenzo's Oil in 1992. Both of them are pretty unlike Mad Max, but even more unlike them are the movies that we rarely, if ever, associate with George Miller: Babe, Pig in the City in 1999, Happy Feet in 2006, and Happy Feet 2 in 2011. 2015's Fury Road, of course, was a hell of a comeback for Miller. With it, he directed one of the greatest action films ever made, and one of the best films ever, bar none. Decades of development hell paid off, at least critically. The film lost money thanks to its myriad changes over the years and because of a difficult shoot, but, according to The Hollywood Reporter, the people at Warner Brothers love George Miller. Sometimes there are just artists that you want to work with. 2022's 3,000 Years of Longing came 7 years after, and while it got decent reviews, it lost money. Most problematically, however, is 2024's Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, which had a devastating loss. Reviews have been great, though it didn't get the same fanfare as Fury Road did. I think that doing the sequel to Fury Road, Mad Max The Wasteland, would have been the right move, but George Miller does whatever he wants. Still, it's dueling with Joker 2 to see which is the biggest flop of the year. Miller might be at a crossroads now, though I'm hoping that that's not the case. Whether or not Mad Max The Wasteland gets made is up in the air, but I hope it does. There are few movies that are pure cinema to the degree that the Mad Max movies are, and George Miller is a singular voice in the world of filmmaking. Ang Lee was in his 30s when his first movie, Pushing Hands, came out. Despite being signed to William Morris, he had a hard time getting a job. But once Lee got going, there was no stopping him. At least not until 2019, after which it felt as though he just dropped off the face of the earth. His follow-up to Pushing Hands, 1993's The Wedding Banquet, was a critical and commercial hit, pulling $24 million on a $1 million budget and getting a nomination for Best Foreign Feature at the Academy Awards. He repeated that feat with 1994's Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, and found more success with 1995's Sense and Sensibility. He had a couple of flops, 1997's The Ice Storm and 1999's Ride with the Devil, though critics liked both. Lee got a win with 2000's Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which grossed $214 million on a $17 million budget. It earned Lee a nomination for Best Picture and Best Director at the Academy Awards and won several other awards. It's also hailed as one of the best movies of the new century. While Hulk did not land, Brokeback Mountain certainly did, winning critical and commercial acclaim. Its Best Picture loss to Crash is still probably the most controversial loss in the Academy's history, though he did win his first of 2 Best Director awards. He had his biggest success so far in 2012's Life of Pi. While it lost Best Picture, this time to Argo, it did win Lee another Best Director Academy Award. The 1-2 punch of his next 2 movies would send Lee reeling. The first was Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk in 2016, which got mixed critical reviews and was a flop at the box office. 2019's Gemini Man, starring Will Smith, proved to be his biggest bomb yet, grossing just $175 million on a $138 million budget. If it was released maybe 20 years beforehand, it probably could have been a hit, but considering that Smith's prior serious sci-fi movie was After Earth, it might not have been a good idea. Lee has not had a successful movie in 10 years at this point. He has 2 movies in the works, but progress is slow. The first is Thrilla in Manila, about the fight between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier in 1975. The other is a biopic of Bruce Lee, in which Ang Lee is casting his son, Mason. Whether or not they'll be made anytime soon or at all remains to be seen. Similar to how I enjoy a great many Michael Bay movies, I enjoy a great many Roland Emmerich movies. The guy does big, though not epic, movies so well that they almost always reward a watch in theaters. 1996's Independence Day is one of my favorite movies of all time, and probably one of the ones that I've seen the most over the years. The complaints against Emmerich are the same as the ones against Bay. Too much focus on visual effects, flimsy narrative, flat characters, and the like. But, unlike many movies, his movies are fun, which is what I want if I'm spending $15 on a ticket. And that's what I get from movies like 1992's Universal Soldier, 1994's Stargate, 1998's Godzilla, which, yes, is still a fun movie and eminently enjoyable, 2004's The Day After Tomorrow, still one of my favorite large-scale disaster movies, 2009's 2012, another great large-scale disaster movie, though not as good as The Day After Tomorrow, and 2013's White House Down. Emmerich makes movies for people that want awe and spectacle, and they usually get it. For a long time, the formula worked for him. While critics derided his work, audiences kept showing up. But since 2016, he's had 3 disappointments in a row. First, there was 2016's Independence Day Resurgence. Emmerich himself said that he should not have done the movie after Will Smith dropped out of the production to do Suicide Squad. It forced him to rework the script, which he said led to issues arising during production. But Will Smith was also part of the reason that people showed up to the first one. It made less than half of the first one, which, when you consider how expensive tickets have gotten, means that a lot fewer people saw it. 2019's Midway was a downright bomb, grossing just $127 million on a $100 million budget. The movie covers the time between the attack on Pearl Harbor to the Battle of Midway, and was something that Emmerich wanted to do for a long time. While not doing well with critics, it did get praise for its accuracy from Rear Admiral Samuel J. Cox, director of Naval History and Heritage Command, who said that, quote, despite some of the Hollywood aspects, this is still the most realistic movie about naval combat ever made, end quote. 2022's Moonfal, though, was a catastrophic loss, making just $67 million on a $150 million budget, his worst loss to date. At this point, and thanks to both the resurgence and Midway flopping, Emmerich either couldn't or didn't want to raise studio money and took it to Cannes, where he found willing backers. The general public, however, was not particularly willing to watch it in theaters. I saw trailers and was somewhat intrigued, though not enough to spend money on it. Emmerich is still working on a lot of things, including another Stargate property, an MMO that's supposed to spawn a show, and a series for Peacock starring Anthony Hopkins, and for which he's directed some episodes. The guy has an active mind, but movie-wise, it seems as though he's at a bit of a crossroads, and I'm hoping that he gets over it soon. Alex Kurtzman has been the writer on some of the most popular movies of the last 20 years. He and Roberto Orci, his writing partner and best friend since high school, both cut their teeth on the TV side of things, starting with writing and executive producing Hercules and Xena, Warrior Princess in the late 90s. Interestingly, another young duo was coming up at this time as well, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, though they also wanted to be in front of the camera. With their work on Alias, Orci and Kurtzman got on well with J.J. Abrams, which would help them down the line. But in the mid-2000s, they also struck up a partnership with Michael Bay, that avatar of woe for film snobs, but well respected among his peers. They first wrote The Island and then the first two Transformers movies for him. In 2009, they started writing the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies. One commonality that most of their written films have is that they've all made money, while around half have been well reviewed, the other half haven't, but pretty much all of them have been fun and delightful, with the exception of, in my opinion, 2011's Cowboys and Aliens. In 2012, Kurtzman decided to try his hand at directing with People Like Us, which did not do particularly well either critically or commercially. The movie was made on a $16 million budget, and he would get around 10 times that much for 2017's The Mummy. A reboot in a franchise that had already been rebooted, The Mummy cost as much as $195 million and grossed $410 million at the box office. Despite ostensibly making more than 2 times its budget, it supposedly lost as much as $95 million thanks to marketing costs, and it was clobbered by critics. According to some reports, Tom Cruise, the lead, pretty much had complete creative control, even though Kurtzman was the director. This was Kurtzman's largest production, and it seems as though he had a difficult time managing it. He also did not enjoy working on the movie, saying that it, quote, was probably the biggest failure of my life both personally and professionally, end quote, and that it was not well directed. Since then, he's mostly been working as a producer and writer on several Star Trek shows, though he has directed some episodes of Star Trek Discovery and The Man Who Fell to Earth, which is a sequel to Nicholas Roeg's 1976 film starring David Bowie. His TV-directed work has gotten decent reviews, so a return to directed features might be in the cards sometime soon for him. Ravich has done more work on the TV side, where he's had some success, but he struck out in a big bad way when it came to movies. Ravich was able to direct just one feature film, 1999's The Astronaut's Wife, which starred Johnny Depp and Charlize Theron. Joe Layden, writing for Variety, wrote, quote, Rosemary's Baby gets an extraterrestrial twist in The Astronaut's Wife, an aggressively stylish but dramatically flaccid drama that plays like an upscale reprise of a 50s sci-fi potboiler, end quote. The movie was derided by audiences and critics, and it was a box office disaster, making less than $20 million on a $75 million budget. It's particularly notable because it was New Line Cinema's most expensive film of 1999 and their biggest flop. It must have done a number on Ravich because he has yet to return to the director's chair, preferring to work as a writer mostly on TV shows. That said, he did do the writing on 2024's The Killer's Game starring Batista, so maybe a return to directing might be in the works. I like to be optimistic, so I'm hoping that he gets another shot. 25 years in director's jail ought to be enough for anyone. Stephen Gaghan is, like several people on this list, an excellent director, as well as an excellent writer. He, like them, hit a snag when he worked on a movie that was so far outside his wheelhouse, it leaves one wondering, what the hell? That's not to denigrate trying new things. To be sure, one should have new experiences. But sometimes that experience is so wildly different from what you usually do that you're left drifting in the wind. Gaghan got his start as a writer working on movies like 2000's Rules of Engagement, which would be directed by William Friedkin, and Traffic, which would be directed by Steven Soderbergh. The latter would win Gaghan the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay, so obviously the guy is talented. His first attempt at writing and directing, 2002's Abandon, did not go well. The movie was a critical and commercial flop. But his second attempt, 2005's Syriana, starring George Clooney, turned out much better. The movie did well commercially, won George Clooney an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, got Gaghan a nomination for Best Original Screenplay, and was considered one of the best movies of the year. He hit a bump with 2016's Gold, a critical and commercial flop, but that bump turned into a full-on wreck with 2020's Dolittle, starring Robert Downey Jr. Why Universal wanted to do a Dolittle movie when 1967's Dr. Dolittle was a flop and without Eddie Murphy is beyond me. But they did, and they wanted Steve Gaghan to write and direct. The movie was a commercial and critical disaster, losing as much as $100 million at the box office. Problems were apparent during production, and 3 weeks of reshoots were needed after the test screenings, which did not seem to improve the film. RDJ called it, quote, a 2.5-year wound of squandered opportunity, end quote. Still, Gaghan seems to be ready to get back up on his feet and has a couple of movies in the works. Sometimes one movie is enough to derail a directorial career, especially if that movie is universally hated and bombs at the box office. That's what happened to Jean-Christophe Comar, who's usually called Pitof. The guy did several behind-the-scenes jobs before directing a movie: assistant director, editor, scoring, graphics design, and visual effects. He was a second unit director on Alien Resurrection before he directed his first movie, The French Vidocq, in 2001. His next movie was 2004's Catwoman, which had a troubled development history. The idea had been in the works at Warner Bros. Since 1993, first with Michelle Pfeiffer reprising her role and Tim Burton as director. But as other opportunities interested them, the film languished in development hell. Ashley Judd was attached to lead, and then Nicole Kidman. At the time, Warner Bros. Was developing a Batman vs. Superman film as well, but after they decided to scrap it, they decided to push forward with Catwoman almost as an afterthought. Halle Berry signed on after a James Bond spin-off starring her character from Die Another Day was cancelled. According to Pitof, the trouble was with the script, which kept changing. Knowing Warner Bros.' troubled history with their superhero movies as of late, as well as with what happened on the Superman movies directed by Richard Donner, this isn't exactly surprising. In his words, quote, after the shoot, when we put the movie together, it didn't work because so much changed during shooting. The pieces were not really fitting together. We had to rethink completely the whole edit, inverting scenes and adding new scenes, end quote. It led to 10 days of reshoots just a month before the movie opened. The only person that can do that is Ridley Scott, who managed a similar feat for All the Money in the World. The movie bombed with critics and at the box office. Pitof and Berry were dealt a bad hand and did not have nearly enough time to put together the movie in a way that would have done justice to the character, cast, and crew. Whereas Todd Phillips had Final Cut for Joker 2, Pitof did not have it for Catwoman. The studio, in this case, bears a big chunk of the blame for how it turned out. That being said, criticisms of how objectified Berry's Catwoman was must fall on Pitof, who said that one of his contributions was to get her to show as much skin as possible. In his words, quote, I want to see skin. I want to have this organic feeling of more like an animalistic thing. Even though she has leather, it's a mix with leather and skin, end quote. Berry, who has a wonderful sense of humor, accepted her Razzie for Worst Actress in Person. Meanwhile, Roger Ebert said, quote, the director, whose name is Pitof, was probably issued with 2 names at birth and would be wise to use the other one on his next project, end quote. Pitof was then attached to the most expensive unreleased movie of all time, Empires of the Deep, but he dropped out. He's been developing other projects since then, though it's been 20 years since he directed a theatrical film. Whether or not he will again remains to be seen. Movies are both art and commerce, not one or the other. That said, they need to be at least one in order to justify a director getting the budget and resources they need for their next movie. If a movie lacks both, you're likely to find your creativity reined in by the studio if you get the budget at all. Most of these directors have great work though, and I hope they're able to get their next projects off the ground.